This week on Cinemaholics, we're kicking the show off with a recap of the 2019 Oscars with special guest Corey Woodruff.
I think it lacked a bit of an identity.
But that's not all. We're also doing our main review for Greta, a new thriller from director Neil Jordan, starring Chloe Grace Moretz and Isabelle Huppert.
And this is where I feel you guys are going to start bringing out your pitchforks.
We're also covering a whole lot of extra films, including Apollo 11, which just hit limited release in IMAX, Gaspar Noé's new film, Climax, and Chiwetel Ejiofor's directorial debut, which he also stars in, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, now streaming on Netflix. I gotta say, the real star of the film, it's not Ejiofor. All that and more is coming up on Cinemaholics. Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. He is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend. He also reviews films for The Playlist, Cut Print Film, Hey You Guys, and of course, Cinemaholics.com. It is Will Ashton.
Hello.
And I am the author of the novel Killer Joy, a book about Pixar, called The Pixar Theory, and I read about film for Adam Insider, Relevant Magazine, the young folks in Cinemaholics. I am John Negroni. We have a guest this week who has appeared on one of our recent bonus episodes, but he's back for the main show. Corey Woodruff, you passed your audition. Congratulations.
Hey, I will take it. I'm glad that that I passed with flying colors.
You did. Well, we had a great conversation about The Kid Who Would Be King. The film, I think, came out in January, and, we can actually mention that film flopped pretty badly, even in the UK. Very sad to hear that.
Yeesh.
I guess you're our bad luck charm, Corey. If we talk about...
I am, so I apologize to the filmmakers of today's show, because
that's right.
Your box office numbers are not going to be good.
All right, you can find more episodes of Cinemaholics on adamtickets.com. You can also write into the show anytime by emailing us, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. You can also support us directly by becoming one of our monthly patrons on patreon.com/cinemaholics. We have a ton of off topics to get to. Later in the show, we will be talking about Greta, Apollo 11, Climax, and The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. A lot of films that not all of us watched, but I think Greta is the one thing that all three of us saw, but it's kind of a grab bag episode, a lot of different topics. We're not going to be spending too much time on any one thing, so we should just get these off topics taken care of. The first thing we have is an announcement. Our anniversary series, Extra Milestone, kicked off this past week. It was a blast. Will Ashton, myself, and Sam Nolan talked about It Happened One Night, which just celebrated its 85th anniversary. And I gotta say, Will, I feel like it was a big success. We had a really fun conversation, and I think the listeners really got a kick out of us talking about an older film for once. Corey, have you seen this one, It Happened One Night?
No, that is one of the screwball comedies I'm missing, but I do really want to watch it.
You should listen to our episode. It's going to get you right in the mood to go check it out. Definitely.
I will indeed. That sounds like a fascinating series.
It's pretty fun, and we'll be doing the next one next month. I think we're going to be celebrating another classic film, but we'll keep you all posted on that. Will Ashton, you have been all over the podcast networks and culture spheres. I mean, you were on, 2 podcasts in addition to 2 episodes of Cinemaholics this week. Tell the listeners about it.
Yeah, I was talking about this off the air. It was quite a week for me last week for podcasting, because I end up being in 4 different episodes. So the ones you're talking about, though, are I got a chance to be in Robert Yanis Jr.'s podcast, Crooked Table. You might remember Robert from, he was on Atomic Blonde, Transformers, the last yeah, basically all 3 or 4 episodes that I did not appear on, not by choice, just by happenstance. So we kind of got a chance to joke about that and all that. But we talked about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is my favorite film. And I'm really happy with how that episode turned out. I hope people check it out, and you get to hear, if you're curious, why that movie means so much to me and why I think it has such an iconic place in film history. And then the second episode is just the second episode of my podcast, A Ogre Totes Ogre. We were joined by my good friend Emily Betts, and we got to talk about, yet again, Garfield, the movie. So I hope people check those out, and let me know what you think if you do.
Yeah, for those of you who still don't know, for some reason, It Ain't Ogre Till It's Ogre is Will's podcast with Matt Serafini and Chris Sheridan, where they talk about one movie every month for a year. They did Shrek the first year, Cat in the Hat the second, and this year is Garfield the movie, which you just did your second episode. I haven't listened to the whole thing yet, but I did finish your Willy Wonka episode, and It was a really nice conversation. It was great to hear you talk really positively about a movie in that way, in that very giddy way. I'm keeping that in mind, Will Ashton, for when we talk about Greta. I was like, I can't wait for you to do the same thing with that film.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Also, guys, the Oscars happened. I don't know if you knew this, but the Oscars for 2019 happened this past Sunday, and we did our episode with Sam Nolan about How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World right before the Oscars last Sunday, so we didn't talk about who won. But let's do a quick little recap. I think all of us are familiar with the winners. Big winners of the night were The Favorite. You know, it got nominated for 10 awards, and it won all of them, right? That's what happened last Sunday?
Oh, John, I think you might have seen a different telecast.
That's right. Green Book.
Favorite awards.
Green Book won Best Picture in kind of a stunning, I don't want to say upset, but disappointment. Let's put it that way. It beat out BlacKkKlansman, Black Panther, Bohemian Rhapsody, The Favorite, Roma, A Star is Born, and Vice. Alfonso Cuarón took Best Director. And probably one of my favorite surprises, and one of the few surprises actually, was Olivia Colman did win Best Actress in a leading role for The Favorite. Now, I'm curious, Corey, do you do any Oscar predictions? Like, did you have like a bracket or anything like that? Oh,
I do. I'm an Oscar nerd through and through. This is like one of the biggest. Yeah, this is one of the big subcultures of film that I push all my chips in on, so to speak. But
how'd you
this
do
year
this
was weird. I don't think I did super, super great, but this was one of those years where I'm like, I don't really mind that because it just felt like 3 or 4 things could have won in any given category except for just a handful. So I was kind of like, well, if I do okay, I'll do okay. Like I got all the big categories right except for actress. Like, and I figured Green Book would win. I figured that I thought the Close would have gotten actress for The Wife, but I think Coleman winning was much more fitting for the actual performance. So I was happy to be wrong in some cases.
Right, yeah. I got most of the major ones, except for I didn't guess Green Book. I was pretty adamant on the Roma still winning, even though I knew the writing was on the wall, or so it were. But one of the ones, Rami Malek, I think a lot of us called that for Bohemian Rhapsody, him getting Best Actor. But Will, I mean, I know, you weren't the biggest fan of Green Book. I know you really didn't like Bohemian Rhapsody. How did you walk away from this Oscar season? Because, it really celebrated 2 films that you and I definitely were not the biggest fans of.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying earlier, I kind of expected it. I mean, not that I was hoping for it or that I wasn't willing to champion an upset, but I knew, like with the PGA win back in January, that it had a better than decent chance of winning Best Picture. And then when it won Best Original Screenplay, there's pretty much a long history of films that win Best Picture usually also win Best Screenplay. So it was, at that point, it had to be between Green Book and BlacKkKlansman, and it seemed more likely that Green Book would win, unfortunately. But I mean, there's a lot of ways you can look at it. I don't know if there's a simple answer for Green Book winning. It's either like really simple or extremely complex. I'm not quite sure which one it is. I feel like there's like some kind of weirdly bipartisan thing with it, where some people might have thought of it being like the middle of the ground film, where other films that were nominated were rather challenging, I guess, and maybe they weren't ready for, say, a superhero movie winning with Black Panther, or I guess, I don't know, maybe The Favorite was a little too out of the box for their taste. It's hard to say for sure. But then I think about that, and I also think, like, well, if that's the case, if they wanted something that wasn't going to be politically divisive, then
A Star is Born.
Right, yeah, why would A Star is Born win?
The funny thing too is, like, A Star is Born was far more successful at the box office. Right. It was more culturally relevant. I mean, Green Book, it's like, it's a movie that a year from now, even, I mean, just imagine a year from now, not even a decade from now, people are going to be like, oh yeah, that movie. I don't remember much about it.
With Green Book or
with Green Book?
Okay. I was going to say, because I've been trying to figure this out and racking my brain about it, and I don't honestly know what happened with A Star is Born, because I mean, I'm on record with the podcast saying that at one point I was pretty certain that it was going to win Best Picture. And
I think the Academy
came out in October.
I think a lot of people in the Academy have an issue with remakes, to be honest. I mean, not all the time. It's not a hard and fast rule, but I think in this case, they just didn't think Best Picture should go to a film that's so resembling of other fills.
Don't you disrespect Barbara, says Academy voter 69. It's just like, what? Like, why is, I don't know. I mean,
nice.
Again, like
Academy voter 69.
Sure.
And at the same time, A Star is Born doesn't deal with any political issues. And most of our Best Picture winners of recent memory have had some sort of social issue that it champions. And it makes me wonder that, along with just the fact that it's a remake, people just didn't feel like it was important enough.
Right.
And the film does, I think, deal with addiction and, depression in pretty subtly ways that I think can really dig into you. But it's like, I just look at all the Best Picture winners from.
It could have come out.
Yeah.
A Star is Born could have come out in 2015.
Oh, yeah?
It didn't feel like a 2018 movie, I guess, to some people maybe. Whereas The Favorite did have, I think Favorite should have won Best Picture. I was, out of all of these films nominated, it was my favorite. But The Favorite was about class warfare. It had, Brexit things in it. It had all kinds of special issues, but people didn't really look at it that way. And then Green Book, which was sort of political and important, but in a very vague way. I guess that's why a lot of people probably put it as their number 2 or their 3. I doubt a lot of people had it as their favorite, but because of the preferential ballot, that kind of favors a lot of people putting Green Book, like you said, Will, in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think you guys are right. I think there is something about that where it isn't really that challenging anyway. It just tackles something very, like you said, vaguely or bluntly, and it's one of those films where it doesn't really say much of anything, but when people see it, they're entertained and they're amused by it, and they can go it was also about something, but it's not really, but they can feel that it is. And I mean, that's the more, I guess, optimistic look at it. I mean, there's also a theory that there are Academy voters who kind of voted for it in spite, because it's safe to say that the movie had no shortage of controversies going into its Best Picture win, and there might have been some voters who were like, "Hey, just don't vote for Green Book because it's not that great of a film, or it has these controversies." And I guess some older Academy voters were who liked the film, or felt like they shouldn't be told what to do. Were like, "Well, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to vote for it." And so, I mean, that's diving into controversy territory or conspiracy territory. I mean, so like I said, the answer is either extremely complicated and a number of different factors. Maybe even the votes got split between the films that were nominated this year. Because we were talking about earlier, there are a lot of exceptional films, and maybe just Green Book was just the one that kind of rose up for different reasons. But it's hard to know for sure.
Right. It probably just bubbled up to the top. And we should say it was a very positive ceremony all around. I personally enjoyed not having a host. I know some people are a little mixed on it and they missed having a host throughout the whole thing. But it was a lean 3-hour, 15 and 20 minute ceremony. And that's how I liked it. I don't know about you guys. And I was very happy to see a lot of these winners. Regina King did win for If Beale Street Could Talk, got Best Supporting Actress. And I think she had one of the best speeches, if not the best. And when Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse won Best Animated Feature, I definitely was like, okay, no matter what happens later on in this ceremony, I can at least be happy with that. I could be happy with Ruth Carter finally winning for costume design. She won for Black Panther. I know a lot of people, when Black Panther was winning some of the technicals, that won Best Production Design too. I think some people were being like, oh, could this be the year? I was like, no. Black Panther is pulling a Mad Max Fury Road. It's not going to win Best Picture. Best Picture is going to go to something that's more in the middle. And it's kind of the same thing as in 2015. Spotlight won that year. It wasn't The Revenant. It wasn't Mad Max Fury Road. It was kind of the film that people had as their 2 or their 3. And that's what kind of rose to the top. And that's kind of the same thing that happened this year. Other controversies be damned, I suppose. But were there anything else really stuck out to you guys about either the ceremony or some of these winners? There's definitely a lot we could talk about. We don't have a ton of time to get to, but anything stick out for you, Corey?
Yeah, I think when you look at just the show, I think it lacked a bit of an identity. And I think that's one of the things that frustrated me. It's that the pacing was just so rat-a-tat, 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 rat-a-tat. It was fun to get to all the awards, but I just wish there was more of just a celebratory nature of just film in general. I liked kind of the pomp and circumstance of some of those shows that would go 4 hours, because it's I'm putting my time apart to actually go celebrate the movies. And I think that the Kimmel shows got away from that in a really bad way, because they would just get into these skits, and it was kind of a late night format where they were trying to go for comedy 24/7. But I like just those random tributes to old movies that they would do, and just, and the montage was fine, but I don't know. I just felt like the fact that they didn't have a host, it went a lot better than I thought it would go from the show. It was lean. They got everything in with the time, but I just would have enjoyed if they put more of a preparatory process, I guess, of trying to make it say something or mean something, but considering all the mess this year, I thought the show was relatively good in spite of it. But I hope next year they do go back to a host, they go back to some sort of a theme, and you can mix that in with the fact that you want to get it in under 3 hours and want to get all the awards out. But on the awards side, it was cool to see Ludwig Göransson win an Oscar. He's had a heck of a moment with Donald Glover. Won also Grammy, got record and song of the year. So just a phenomenal thing to see a guy like that who was, 7-8 years ago doing music for Community and doing Donald Glover's like early hip hop albums to like winning Grammys and Oscars. And his stuff in Creed was really good. And that really kind of hinted to me that he was going to be in music and going to be in movies and know how to make a really cool sound that we've not really heard before. So I thought that was one of my favorite wins of the night.
Yeah. And, to what you were saying about the host stuff, one thing maybe that made me like the night in general, in spite of like nobody bookending the ceremony, was that I like that they put some effort and some creativity into the people presenting the awards. I had this moment where every time I was watching people come on stage and talk about the next award, there was always something fun, or there was always something interesting about that dynamic. It's like, oh, who's going to do this one? It's like, oh, cool. Like there were little Easter eggs of like, oh, they're together on stage because they were both in this movie. And there were fun things like that. And I guess that was enough for me. But what about you, Will? I mean, are you kind of feeling the same way? Like, do you feel like there should be a host named Will Ashton with his tuxedo shirt getting on stage and just guiding us along on the journey of the Oscars?
Well, don't give away too much for next year, John. But I think, I know that this year, for reasons relating to NBC or ABC, I mean, that they wanted to be like 3 hours, and that like they're just like, whatever happens, just try and make it 3 hours. So I feel like if it had to be between like showing all of the categories on television or like having celebratory montages or skits, I think the way they went was definitely the better of the two. Like, I think.
Agreed.
For me, I mean, if that's like, if they can't like have like a 5-hour extravaganza like we're used to having, I'm fine with having it being condensed and just like focusing on the meat and grits. Like, I don't really need I like the celebratory stuff. Like, anybody who is a fan of cinema, I think kind of gets a little nostalgic about that stuff. But I understand that if we can't have like what we're used to having, then we have to kind of settle. And for me, if like Corey was saying, like considering all the stuff that's going on leading up to the show, like every single like fumble from the Academy, I'm kind of impressed that they were able to put on a competent show in general. So I thought it was pretty good overall, as far as the show itself goes. Yeah.
Were there any awards, of course, that stuck out to you before we move on?
Trying to think. I mean, we talked about the big ones. Nothing's coming to mind.
Winning was pretty great.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for Spike Lee. Yeah, that was probably my favorite moment, was Samuel Jackson and Spike Lee kind of in that embrace, and like clearly so enthusiastic about this win. That was pretty great.
Yeah, and similarly, I mean, when Green Book won Best Original Screenplay, it was just like, wow, you know what? There's a screenplay that just, it reminded me of when Bohemian Rhapsody won Best Editing, and it was just like, finally, like,
that
game good. Recognizes game. And I don't know if you've ever seen the screenplay for Green Book, but there were some really funny tweets where people were holding it up next to other screenplays that were nominated, and it's so sad, it's hilarious. But yeah, there were definitely some interesting choices the Academy made this year.
Well, we'll see how great that screenplay was when we see Nick Vagalonga's next film. That's Amore.
Oh man,
a character named Patty Amore, and
all the films to do in his follow up, this is the one. And you know what? He's staying on brand. And
I mean, he would not be able to make that movie if he wasn't an Academy Award winning screenwriter, right? Like, everyone else would be like laughing him out of town, but he's like, well, I mean, he has an Oscar. I mean,
that's right.
But I also gonna say, I also loved the moment when Guillermo and Alfonso were on stage together, and they were able to celebrate their win. That was,
we didn't say, Alfonso Cuarón was. Oh, I did say that, best director. Yeah,
right. Especially because Guillermo wasn't sure if he was able to be at the ceremony because he was sick or something, he said. So I felt like he knew that Alfonso was probably gonna win. And he's like, I want to be there for my friend getting his second Oscar. So I thought that was pretty touching.
I love this like Latin American, Avengers style director guild that's like forming up with Alfonso Cuarón, Guillermo del Toro, Alexander Inarritu, Maybe Robert Rodriguez can join the gang someday. Who knows? But I'm really looking forward to Benicio del Toro directing his first film. So who knows? But okay, those were the Oscars. Obviously, there's a ton of other things that we could talk about, but, it happened. We're moving on. It was one of those things, we're going to forget all about it by next year. But there was one interesting thing before we get off topics that kind of came out of the ceremony, and that was the fact that, Netflix, walked away with a lot of big prizes. I mean, Roma was a film that did have like a limited theatrical run, but it didn't play in like every multiplex in the land, right? It won a few Oscars, like Best Cinematography, which is the one we didn't mention, but there are definitely a lot of people in old school Hollywood who are getting a little concerned with streaming services. They're getting a little concerned with Netflix being able to spend huge Oscar budgets to market their films. I mean, it didn't work, obviously. The winner was Green Book and not Roma. But Steven Spielberg kind of stirred the pot a couple of days ago, and there's been this massive debate about whether or not Spielberg has a right to sort of impose new rules on the Academy to make it a little bit harder for Netflix to basically, in some ways, buy their way in, but in other ways, not really use the like traditional distribution system for theaters. I think anecdotally, most people I know seem to be falling way, way, way more on Netflix's side in this whole thing. But Corey, I know you've been following this. I mean, where do you land? Because it's definitely a sticky one. This doesn't feel like a debate with a clear side, because to me there are positives and negatives to the streaming model versus the old school theatrical model. But what do you think?
It's complicated. I mean, I am a theater purist. I did not want to watch Rome on a TV for the first time. I dreaded that all year long until they finally announced a press screening where I was like 8:00 on a Saturday morning, and I didn't even care that I had to work late the day before. I was like, I'm going to go. And it's just, I think the theatrical experience is enthralling. I think it's vital. I think film is made for a theater. And at first I was really anti-streaming. I just really was like, you can't take away the movie theater. And it's like, all these filmmakers are going to Netflix. And I was just like, why is this happening? Like, I just was dreading the thought of having to watch an Alfonso Cuarón film for the first time on a television. I was just like, ooh, I don't like that. If I can watch it in a theater, that's where I want to watch it. Especially one of his films are just so immersive, and it's just so important. Like with Rome, I can't even fathom having watched it on a TV for the first time. It's like, I haven't needed to see that in a theater to really be able to get just the sound mix and watching the way the cinematography moves. It's just like, I need a theater. But, at the same time, I really have began to kind of come around more to Netflix, just because does Roma exist the way that it does if Netflix doesn't give the money to it? I mean, Joseph Kahn had a really good thread about this, talking about just kind of the really harsh realities of the entertainment industry, is that it's an industry first. This is a business. These are people trying to make things to make money. And, a lot of these mid-grade films, studios aren't funding them anymore. They're just not giving them the type of funding that they need. And artists who want to make some of these more lavish mid-grade movies that were really successful with awards and critics and all of that for a long time, studios are going away from. And it's because the audiences are not showing up like they used to for these types of movies. It's going more to a blockbuster format. The indies can get away with it since the funding is a little bit lesser. But you look at a movie like Triple Frontier that's coming out, J.C. Chandor's new film coming out on Wednesday, or I think theaters Wednesday, and then next week will be on Netflix. Yeah. It's been 5 years since we've had a J.C. Chandor film, and it's like Netflix funded that. And I think that just the dichotomy is they're also dumping it on a Wednesday in March with no fanfare. And maybe that means it's not amazing. It really would kill me if it wasn't, because that's one of my favorite filmmakers right now. But I think that's the dichotomy, is that studios are not funding some of these movies. Netflix is beginning to keep this mid-grade drama, kind of risky, more risk-taking type film alive. And I don't think Roma gets made the way people want it to be made if Netflix doesn't fund it. I think a studio would come in with some concessions for Cuarón, than making him try to tell that story in a different way. And I can't imagine that story being told in any other way. And, I think Netflix is doing an amazing job of promoting diverse talent. And I think that's another thing that the studio system continues to struggle with. It's like, it took us till 2018 to get Black Panther, 2019 to get Captain Marvel, 2017 to get Wonder Woman. And I think that, Netflix is doing a great job of giving more diverse talent more opportunities to be able to tell stories that the studios may not necessarily fund. So I think Netflix has gone from being a bit of a nuisance to being somebody that's crucial right now and keeping a part of cinema alive that we all love. But it's just the catch-22 is, do we have to leave the movie theater to keep movies alive in certain ways? And I think that is just something that is unbearable for me to try to process. It's like, but that's the movies. I go to the movies to see movies. But, I think that Eric Cohn at IndieWire had a great point. Like, a lot of us discover great film through television. Like I watched Citizen Kane and Casablanca for the first time on a TV. I've seen a lot of classics that way. It's not the end of the world, to have to watch a movie on a TV. I think there's certain films that are made certain ways. I still like Rome. I want to see it in a theater if at all possible. But, I think that the Spielbergs of the world are nostalgic for the theater. And I think that they want to keep that experience alive. And I think it's fair to say Netflix needs to have a cap spending like all the other studios do, I guess. But I think that the problem is that you look at the business side of it and they're just not. Spielberg is fighting for companies that are not funding movies that he was able to make when he was younger. And I think that's the problem, is that Spielberg was a renegade filmmaker when he started. He was a guy that was going out making things that were riskier. But studios want safe investments now, with the theater population kind of fluctuating between what they actually want. I mean, they're going to fund more Bohemian Rhapsodies. Okay, that movie is going to do a lot. We're going to have a lot more just toothless music biopics. Ironically, I'd say toothless with Bohemian Rhapsody, but it's just like, yeah, but as I get off my podium here, I really love theaters. I will fight for the theater experience. I will go watch. I flew on my birthday to New York to go watch 2 movies in IMAX 70 millimeter. Like, I am a theater purist, but at the same time, I want all forms of film to push forward. I want all these voices to be able to be amplified and to be able to make art. But the problem is right now is that the studios and the theater chains it's the studios. They're not funding these movies. They're not giving artists the creative freedom that they need to make the art they want to. And maybe Netflix at times gives people too much reign, but I think that there's got to be a happy medium somewhere. I just don't know where we're going to find it, as long as people begin to kind of argue different points on different sides.
I mean, here's my big problem with Netflix in that regard, is because you kind of mentioned it. They are elevating these films that would never get made by the studios. A lot of films made by women and people of color, but they don't market the ones that they don't think will win awards. So here's what keeps happening is, like, every year, all of these Netflix films come out and no one watches them except for some of them. And so to me, I'm getting a little conflicted because I'm like, this isn't sustainable. Like, they keep putting all of this money in all these different movies that maybe people will see To All the Boys I Loved before and set it up. That's great. Netflix, you're saving the rom-com. That's so wonderful, Netflix. But then all these other films like Shirkers, they don't really care about. Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I mean, who knows how many people actually saw that? And they're just going to start pivoting more to films like Bright, the ones that they know are like big watchers. And the same thing's going to happen to Netflix. It's happening to the studios eventually. And I just get very, very cautious when people are like, Netflix is so great, and Netflix and Amazon. We didn't really mention Amazon, but they're doing so much good work to make these films no one else is making. I'm like, yeah, that's great. I loved Filmstruck too. Filmstruck was so great. Filmstruck preserved films, and it was a streaming service, and you didn't really own the media, but you were able to watch these films. So what happened? As soon as money became a bigger issue by like 1 decimal point, Filmstruck was gone, and everything with it was gone. A lot of films people will never be able to see again because it's just gone at this point. And sure, Criterion Channel is happening. We're really excited about that and we want to support that. But I look at a venture capital funded company like Netflix, which, I think I want them to keep doing what they're doing, but I just want people to be a little bit more cautious about Netflix, and like we shouldn't be putting all of our eggs into streaming. I understand that because I'm the same way. I love the theatrical experience too, and the studio system is broken, but that doesn't mean streaming is going to solve all of our problems. And not that anyone's saying that. I just hope that people are really paying attention to some of the huge pitfalls that can happen if we just kind of go full on streaming 100%, which I don't know anybody who's advocating that, but that's kind of where we're headed if things keep going as they're going. But what about you, Will? You've heard us talk a lot.
Yeah, I mean, more or less, I'm in agreement with both of you guys. I mean, you brought it up already, but my third favorite film of last year was The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. That was a new Coen brother film, and I mean, I'm disappointed that I didn't get to see that in theaters. It didn't play near me in theaters, but I'd rather just have the film than it never existing. I mean, to me, that would be a greater loss than to not see in theaters. So for me, I mean, I would certainly champion any film being in theaters. I mean, I think 9 out of 10 times, I think I prefer the theatrical experience to the home viewing experience. But I understand that that's not always an option, and that, as we are progressing, that, I mean, there is a greater likelihood that I'll be watching probably 80 to 90% of the movies I watch on my laptop or on a TV screen, which isn't preferable. But again, what I value the most is the film itself. And I mean, if I had to lose the through experience, it would certainly be a tremendous loss. I can't even imagine what my life would be like without it. But at the same time, I don't want to lose film altogether. And I think that might be what the conversation is shifting towards. But I mean, yeah, we've talked about our problems with Netflix itself. I mean, it's like a catch-22. It's like you are glad to have Netflix around to champion films or bring back shows that might have been lost and all this stuff. And they have certainly proven themselves in a number of ways. But at the same time, I totally agree with you, John, that, the marketing is often not there, or the word of mouth is often what they rely upon. And it's not to say that, like, Shirkers is a great example. Like, Shirkers is a fantastic film, and we both love it. We have, and if it weren't for you and a couple other people, I wouldn't even know about Shirkers. Like, I just would not. Like, it would not come up at all. I don't ever see it on Netflix site until I typed it in to the keypad. So, I mean, yeah, I am glad that it's there, and that it's a resource that is providing films that may not get made or promoted or distributed otherwise. But at the same time, I do totally agree that Netflix has a long way to go before it earns my full, unbridled appreciation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about, I'm going to be talking about The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind later, which is a Netflix film. And, I saw another Netflix film this past week, the Behind the Curve, the Flat Earth documentary. I'm not really going to talk about it. It's just, it's a Flat Earth documentary that's kind of entertaining. But like, I really had a lot of fun just popping those in, watching a quick documentary, and then watching This Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, which was at Sundance. I didn't get a chance to see it, and I was like, oh, I wanted to see this, so now I can. I'm right on Netflix. That's great. And I missed my chance to see it in theaters, and it's not really playing around here. So I guess I'm conflicted on it, because obviously I like watching streaming. It's very convenient to just watch things on my own TV, but I guess I worry more about the like cultural conversation around things. Like, I keep seeing these films that either I really like or I really dislike, and I want to talk about them, but I'm losing that opportunity because I'm not watching all the same things as other people, and we just get pushed into these bubbles with only people who watch all the things that we watch. And it's like, if you don't have a Twitter account, where are you going to go? Like, I mean, there's forums, there's message boards and things like that, but then again, you're just kind of being pushed into these little pockets where there are films happening all around you that you're not seeing. And so that's something that kind of worries me, because what's nice about theaters is that there is sort of this unifying, people in middle America can be watching the same film that I'm watching over here on the West Coast, and so on. So that's kind of where I land, but we do have to move on, unfortunately. It's a great topic, but yeah, finish this
one quick point. I just want to say, I do love, and I'll give credit to Guy Lodge because he said this on Twitter. I do love that this whole conversation revolved around Green Book, which, as he said, is a film that no one says, oh, you got to see that in the cinema. Which
well, I mean,
very true.
We could mention all kinds of interesting case studies, like Get Out. If Get Out had come out on Netflix, do you think it would have been the cultural hit that it was? I don't know, and I kind of hesitate to say it would be. It's hard to say, but that's something that does worry me. It's like, what's a Get Out that we might miss out on because it goes to a streaming service and nobody watches it? That's what. But then
again, yeah, I mean, you could do hypotheticals like that all the time. But then you could also say, like, would like you were talking about, To All the Boys I Loved Before, would that be a bigger hit in theaters? Like, would
absolutely,
that just kind of
exactly.
Would that slip under the
nobody
radar
would have seen
media?
Yeah, nobody would have seen
one film though we need to bring up in this conversation, and that's Bird Box. because
I mentioned
Box,
Bright instead of Bird Box for some reason. I'm so sorry.
No, but I mean, Bird Box to me, that film was a cultural moment for about 3 weeks. And I don't know if that hits that if it's in theaters. I think Bird Box is a watershed moment for streaming. I think that's a film Netflix did very little marketing for. I think they had a big star.
They did like guerrilla marketing for it.
Yeah, guerrilla marketing.
Yes, it was just, just the subtleties. But I think what happened was they put it out right around Christmas. People needed something to watch, and Sandra Bullock's face came up with a blindfold on Netflix. And people began to kind of just pop it in, text their friends about it. And it started like an entire viral moment. And I'm wondering, is this where genre filmmaking is going to go?
Because next Christmas, Julia Roberts is going to be wearing like Hello Kitty headphones. And people are going to be like, what? Can she hear? And here we go again.
But I think that's also why Bright did well, right? Because that was also a December release. That was around Christmas. And people were like, oh, the new Will Smith movie. It's on Netflix. We don't have to go out to theaters to see it. Sure, why not? What am I going to lose watching a new Will Smith movie on Netflix? And then I don't know if anyone really liked Bright, but a lot of people saw it because, we're not going to talk about the quality of Bright. I'm just saying, like, from a purely, like, people seeing it question or whatever, like, that's, people just saw it because it was viable right then. I think that's what happened with Bird Box. And who knows what will be this December, like you said, it could be anything with an A-list star that people don't feel like seeing in theaters, but they'll check it out if it's for free on Netflix. So who knows?
All right, with that, we finally have to move on. Definitely our longest off topics in quite a while, but very good conversation. Thank you guys for contributing to that, because I think that it was something that was a good conversation worth having. But let's get into what the listeners are really here for. They want to know all about Greta. And my goodness, all three of us have seen this. So this is a new suspenseful thriller. It was directed and co-written by the prolific Neil Jordan. Love a lot of his films. It stars Chloe Grace Moretz as Frances, a young 20-something New York transplant from Boston, so not Frances Ha. She's just moved to town with her best friend Erica, played by Micah Monroe, who I think is a real star of this movie. She's dealing with the recent trauma of her mother's untimely death. She works as a waitress and is still getting acclimated to her new life when one day she stumbles across an expensive-looking handbag with an ID in it for a French woman named Greta, played by Isabelle, I think it's Huppert, I think. She returns the bag, which Greta is, of course, very grateful for. The two begin a strong friendship where you can tell Frances is leaning on Greta for maternal support and direction. It's just a charming New York City story, right? That's all well and good until eventually Frances discovers Greta has a dark secret. She intentionally left that handbag on the subway for someone to return it to her. And when Frances pulls away for obvious reasons, Greta begins to stalk and harass her in extremely creepy fashion, even showing up one night at the restaurant where Frances works. So here is a clip where Frances is forced to wait on Greta and bring her the drink she ordered. Here's a clip.
The Chablis.
May I? Bit like you. Promises a lot, then disappoints.
Okay.
I deserve better!
Oh my god. I'm so sorry.
You can't do this to me. To us.
Are you a child?
No, you're the child. You need someone to love. You need a mother to hold you. You love someone and you're afraid to love. We both know it's true.
Don't you dare talk to me about my mother.
Darling, don't you understand? She had to die. She had to die for us to meet!
Are you out of your mind?
You just can't accept it! Look at her! She's full of loss, of grieving! She's gone, Frances! Just accept it! It's called moving on!
All right, that is a clip from the film Greta. Obviously, the feel-good spring movie where an unlikely friendship blossoms. But yeah, so definitely a pretty intense, gripping film. And, it does all the things it's probably supposed to do as a genre film. But despite all that, critics are a bit mixed on it. Like, something deeper is missing. I, for one, enjoyed it quite a bit. I found it to be a very quirky watch. I actually recommend it to anyone even remotely curious from the trailer. I think you'll get a kick out of it. But what about you, Corey Woodruff? Did you fall in love with Greta?
Yeah, it's my favorite film of the year so far.
Oh, wow.
I think it's brilliant. This is, to me, it's like, there's a film critic that I'm good friends with named Jason Shawhan who says that's like one of the best like kind of thrillers he's seen in years, and I'm almost inclined to agree. I think it is phenomenal. I mean, this is really like, I was shocked, and I think that's part of it is I was so shocked. I didn't understand where in the world this movie came from. Once I learned that it was Neil Jordan, I was like, that makes a little more sense. But I think it's brilliant. I think it is just such great socio-political horror. I think it just does such a great job of just being a grimy, fun, stalker thriller at the same time. Has a ton of really interesting commentary on the social and digital age. And I think it's delectably made. I think the performances are great. This film is like, I wasn't prepared for it. And I was openly yelling things in the theater because there was like 8 people in there. And I was just like, you know what? I'm going to have a visceral experience with this. And there's just shots in that movie where it's just so committed to being as crazy and as just ludicrous and genre happy as possible. But it's also really artistic. It's really, very European in the way that it kind of unfolds its story. And I just think it's and sometimes it's really beautiful. Like that scene, we'll probably talk more about the film in depth. I won't give too many spoilers away, but this is like this is my favorite film of the year so far. I think it's just a beautifully made, delicate genre, just nasty odor. That's great.
Yeah, I think the way this film won me over was because when I had low expectations, I thought it was, watching the trailer, I was like, I feel like I know the whole story. I know all the beats. I know what's going to happen. And no, the structure was different. It was offbeat. There were things that happened in here. On the one hand, I got to knock this film down a little bit because the character of Francis frustrated me to no end. It was that situation where I was yelling at the screen, not in public because people were in the theater, but I definitely was so frustrated with Francis because she does the dumbest stuff. But the film didn't unfold in a lot of the cliche ways that my brain was telling me. So I think I really got a kick out of it for that reason. Like I was watching it, and as it went, I was like, oh my goodness, like I didn't see that coming. And I was like, okay, well I want to keep seeing what happens next. And I was pretty invested in this, but I will say, I don't think I would watch this movie again. Like maybe I would watch it again with somebody else, like to introduce it to them. But I definitely finished it and was like, I'm good. I do not want to have to see this again because it's a bit of a tough watch in some ways. But Will, I think you're probably the least positive out of all of us. So
yeah,
what do you think? Walk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, I went into it pretty enthusiastic. I didn't see any trailers or anything for it. I just saw the poster, and I think I saw the scene where Isabella Hubert threw the table, and I was like, okay, that's enough. I'm good. I'm ready for this film. She's fantastic. I think she's always great, and I think she brings the right energy to this film, and I think her performance is just wry enough, and I think it gave the movie a little more class, and it made me certainly appreciate the movie a little bit more if she was not in it. But, and this is where I feel you guys are going to start bringing out your pitchforks, but for me, I was really not into the film beyond the last 20, maybe 30 minutes of the movie at most. That's where I was like, okay, this is where the film's kind of owning up to being kind of campy and a little schlocky, and it's having fun. The violence is a lot more extreme. Like the movie is gonna have some entertainment camp value, like I said, to it that allows it to be a little more pulpy and silly and a little more unpredictable, as you might have been saying, John. But I just was so bored throughout the first 2/3 of this movie. And I think for me, it's just that, I mean, I just don't really see what this movie does that hasn't been done before. And I don't really see what this movie does to make me value it over other films that have talked about the dangers of the internet, or, not talking to strangers, or, the stranger you trust, but then you realize are your biggest enemy and stuff. Like I think about last year I saw Best Friends with Tommy Wiseau, and it's kind of similar. And I would probably see Best Friends, even though it's probably on par with this film, before I watch this one again. So I don't know. For me, it's not terrible. I just found it fairly mediocre.
All right, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying because, the first 2/3, I wasn't that into it either, but I do think this is one of those films with a strong finish. I don't know. I don't feel like arguing that much because I can't really explain why this worked for me. There was something about when there were scenes between Micah Monroe and Frances, with Chloe Grace Moretz, should say her name, when she's just this super naive kid. And
yeah.
And Micah Monroe is just she's the audience surrogate. And she's what I know a lot of people are going to rightly praise Isabelle Huppert for just going all the way with this performance. But Micah Monroe just, you feel like, yes, thank you. You're in this movie to represent me. You're the voice of reason here. And
oh yeah, just the stereotypical best friend character who I think
not stereotypical. No, because the stereotypical best friend character would be ditzy. She would just sort of be shouty and things like that. But she actually says things.
Different best friend character. That's a different stereotype. This is a stereotype where beyond,
you can't just
like, what
call it all a stereotype.
No. Okay, there's two separate. Okay, hang on. Let me make my point. There are two separate types of like best friend stereotype. That's the one you're talking about, the ditzy one you're talking about. But that's what I'm referring to. I'm talking about the one where if it's not for Chloe Grace Moretz, like she doesn't really have a life. Like her character basically just revolves around her best friend. Otherwise, she just goes to a club, and like that's like the extent of like what her backstory is. That's what I'm talking about by the stereotype of the best friend.
No, because I think they have a deeper connection beyond that, because the Micah Monroe character, they were friends before. The reason that she has this apartment is because Micah Monroe has money. And so them being roommates, I thought that was pretty believable. I mean, you can sort of point to similarities between her and other characters in other movies, but I think she does serve a very clear purpose and function in the movie as her best friend. And I thought it was touching, and they actually did it in a good way. Like, I wouldn't look at that and say, well, because there have been other friends in these movies that kind of are similar. No, I think Monroe does her own thing with the role. I think she has like her own energy to it, and she kind of like, I don't know, there was something about her presence that like you could feel like the screenplay loved putting her in there. And that to me is what works about this movie, and what makes it not mediocre is the screenplay is actually pretty good. It's dealing with pretty mediocre subject matters, like, okay, harassing, thriller, suspense, all of that. But I just think it's the way that I think the way that Jordan just like does it in this format, the way that he stages everything and sort of like runs it about, is what makes it work ultimately, in my opinion. But what do you think, Corey?
I mean, it's interesting. It's very De Palma-esque, I think. Just in the way that he was always very happy to embrace the genre at play while also dealing with the filmmaking and the heavy material at the same time. I don't know what it was about this that just hit me in the right way. I thought Huppert is great. I think she is just so devious in this, and it's just so fascinating to see like who some people feel is the actor of her generation just slumming it up in a really just to the wall performance. I mean, she goes like 110%, and it is, there's a shot in the movie. I don't want to give it away, but it is so, quite frankly, grotesque in the way that they stage it. And it's like Jordan knows that this image that you're looking at is just like, it will make you a little queasy, but Huppert just sells it. And she is just so on just playing up with the, just as you guys say, the camp of it, and just like I think that's what Rotten Tomatoes' old blurb said, that it was just that it dives into the campiness. That was their blurb they used. And I think that it does. It's a film that just is so aggressively wants to be one of these just like, to me, it's a horror film. I think this is a definite horror film because it wants to do the Basic Instinct. It wants to. We all know Jordan loves
horror films, so that's definitely a good comparison.
Yeah, and the film that really popped in my head was Play Misty for Me. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it was Clint Eastwood's first directorial film, and it's very similar. It's got the person that begins like the classic stalker format. They meet, they have a relationship of some sort, but the person lingers around until the second person really wants to kind of get away. But it's kind of at the same time, it does have that European flair to it. And there's this conversation between Moret's character and this one person who we won't say since we're not doing spoilers in the conversation, but it's just so artistic, and the way that they put the music in the background and the way it's edited, it was beautiful to me. It's just the film, like, it's like almost lyrical. It just continues on with this loop, and it barely kind of breaks time down to really kind of settle itself. It really just wants to keep going on a pretty just forward trajectory. But it has some Misery comparisons to Kathy Bates' film, of course, with Stephen King. I think the thing I loved about it the most is that it was the way it was paced. I think the pacing in that film is immaculate. I think it's one of the best edited films I've seen this year and last year, really. I think this is a movie that people are going to begin to come back around to in 2 or 3 years. maybe if the conversation keeps it alive, maybe it won't. But I feel like this film, it's got some tangibleness to it that I feel like is going to give it an audience somewhere. But I don't know if people are going to watch it or see it. It's such a weird release for the theater right now as it stands. The genre films do well, but I don't know if this will find its audience, but it just hit me in the right way. I think that Moritz is great. She is just such a phenomenal actress right now for suspense thriller. She just does such a good job of buying into the premise and selling all the fear that goes on. But I don't know. I think that it can definitely hit people the wrong way. I think it's a film that knows what it is. It knows what it wants to do. And if you don't buy into that, you're not going to hook on. But I was supremely caught off guard with what he was trying to do here. I thought it was just really, really, really fun. It was just really, it's a spooky movie. I mean, it definitely plays in. There's a certain scene where like a text message changes the entire perception of the way people look at a character and where their well-being is. And just right now, you just think of how digitally connected we are and how much trust we have in digital communication. And I think that's an element of it to me that was really, really unsettling.
So we can count that as your final thoughts, Corey. So what's your letter grade for Greta?
I'd say A-. I may not go fully an A, but I'd say an A- for sure.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. My biggest criticism toward this film is its very heavy implication that somebody from Boston can't survive New York. I thought that was a little annoying. Like, this idea that Frances is this like naive, but she's from Boston. Like, come on, like put her in a different, like, if she's from Ohio. That's where that makes sense. Like somebody from Ohio or somebody from like Virginia, like a more, doesn't have to be that rural, but you know what I mean? I just, that was so unbelievable for me that like she would just be so naive considering where she was from. And I just felt like it was Neil Jordan digging at the place where I was born, but I was going to say, that's
this seems more personal.
This is more personal. This is not,
right.
This isn't film criticism. This isn't, no. But yeah, I think that, yes, this film, I think you said it well with the editing and the pace, Corey. It's a film that is at its best in the end, but what's good about it is that it earns its dive into campiness. It actually has momentum that gets to a place where you totally believe that this is what will happen, even though it's something that was inevitable in this movie. But because of the way it's structured, you just don't, at least for me, I didn't fully see it coming. So I'm a B on this one. I have a lot of issues with it, but I just think that it's perfectly enjoyable. And I think, yeah, people should go check it out. It's not taking the box office by storm whatsoever. So I'm a little disappointed in that. And I can see why this came out at TIFF last year. I definitely think that was a good idea for them to try to get more of this kind of genre film out there at a prestige film festival. But yeah, Will Ashton, tell us all about your B+.
Sure. No, I mean, I don't think I'm too far off the mark from what you guys are saying. I just don't find myself being quite as positive on the film ultimately. I just think the stuff that bothers me a little too much. But I do think that on the whole, like I think, Corey, I do think you're onto something. I do see that this film maybe being a bit of a cult classic in a way. Like I could see people kind of getting a bowl of popcorn and like quoting along when she's like, "They must be building an ark." Or it's like little quotes like that. I could see them like cackling along with. And I mean, there's a couple moments where I chuckled up, but I think that's all credit to Isabella. How do you pronounce her last name, Corey?
Isabelle Huppert.
Huppert? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would say certainly her performance brings a lot of life to this film. I don't know if I'm quite as strong on the screenplay as you two are, but I do think, because I mean, I don't know, I just feel like throughout the movie, especially at the beginning, he was like, this is totally like older guy writing millennial girls thing. Definitely like, who has a house phone in Tribeca? Like, I just want to know.
Somebody from Boston, clearly.
I guess, yeah, you'd know, I guess, Sean. But in any case, my only main thing I want to say, and I feel this is a little mean, but something I've noticed that I think Chloe Grace Moretz is good, but I've noticed a lot recently that I feel like every time I watch her performances, with the exception of Hit Girl, like I feel like there's often like she's good, but someone could be doing this better. And I got that sense a lot during this movie, especially with like Mika Moreau in the film. I was like, I kind of wish she was the lead. I feel like she would bring.
I had that same thought, yeah.
Like a little bit. Because I think that's where I'm going from with the script. I think Frances is kind of an underwritten character to begin with. And I don't think, I guess she's kind of bringing like the doe-eye innocence to it. That is fine. But I just wish there was just something more to that. Like maybe a little bit stronger to make that lead character a little more compelling, to make those first 2/3 a little more engaging, at least for me. So, yeah, I'm not totally against the film. I was expecting to be a lot more negative than I ultimately was. For me, it's just a C+. Like, it's okay. I might grow to like it more upon rewatch if I ever check it out again, but I just am not quite as high as you two are, unfortunately.
I just feel bad, Will Ashton, because, the whole point of this movie is everyone needs a friend. Corey and I, we became friends talking about this movie, and here you are left out in the cold. And I just feel bad about that. So maybe Isabelle Huppert can come on the show next week. And
I'm putting on my gloves now, John.
Yeah.
I'm never going to look at the piano the same way again after watching a movie like this.
Yeah, I'm always going to be like,
the
looking
piano
around.
is evil.
Yeah, if it has like that metronome on top, I'm definitely going to be a little suspicious. But yeah,
let me check in to see what's going on.
I will say that element was good. I did like that little, like how they played up with that. Like I really wish the last third of this was as good, or the first 2/3 of this was as good as the last third. But I digress.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to see that Stephen Ree was in this for some reason. He tends to show up in a lot of. He's also an Irish actor, and Neil Jordan is of course Irish. He shows up in a lot of his films. But I was very tickled to see Colm Feore in here because he was in Umbrella Academy. He plays the patriarch of that new Netflix series, and I was like, oh hey, it's Hargreaves. And I just finished Umbrella Academy on Netflix, so it's kind of funny to see him. And last thing I'll say too is Micah Monroe. She should be a bigger star than she is right now. I think the only film I saw her in last year was the one Hot Summer Nights, and that was it.
Oh yeah, so she's great. Yeah,
she is great. It's a travesty that she's not in more things. So that's Greta. I think it's like in the 60% ish territory on Rotten Tomatoes. So the mixed reviews here make a lot of sense. And I think it's only projected to get maybe up to 6 million for the box office, but I think so far it's only made a couple million. So not sure how it's going to do at the box office. Probably not going to do super well. And I think that's a shame, but who knows? Maybe you're right, Corey. Maybe one day, yeah, this is going to be the kind of film that people are going to rediscover as if they're the first ones to talk about it, and they'll find this episode and they'll be like, oh, they called it. There you go. All right. So moving on, I'm going to talk about a film that just came out in limited release. This is another Sundance film that is getting a limited release. It's called Apollo 11. This is a new documentary from CNN Films and Neon, and I think you saw it as well, Corey?
Mm-hmm. Went last night.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, like I said, it premiered this past January at Sundance. It's not getting a limited release in IMAX, actually, and I think it truly earns that format because it's a straightforward presentation of the famous Apollo 11 mission, but it's stretched out onto the big screen using never before seen archival footage, which is in 70 millimeter format. So you're obviously not watching the Apollo 11 mission in real time, but there are like a few points in the mission that are in real time, like when they're touching down on the moon, the countdown, and things like that. There are also a few instances that kind of put you in the shoes of the mission control people. You're not always out in space or, anything like that, but you spend a lot of time in mission control. You spend a lot of time outside of the launch pad where like people are actually like spectating and things like that. You get a real sense of what was going on, the mood and everything to that effect. So I think this film was pretty good for capturing how tense this mission was, because we forget how big of an undertaking it was. It was a huge gamble for NASA. It was a huge gamble for America. It was a gargantuan risk. People had died at this point. And I say we, but the country just did not know if Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins would actually pull this off and make it back safely. So there's a great video from Patrick Willems on YouTube. It's about unintentional historical cinematic universes. I highly recommend it. They're the sort of cinematic universes that happen by chance and coincidence. I actually watched this right before I saw Apollo 11. It just showed up and I did not plan this. And in the video, Willems discusses how space travel films like First Man, The Right Stuff, Hidden Figures, and Apollo 13 share a lot of similarities with modern cinematic universes in the way that they draw from a single source material, in their case, history. And you have different characters from these movies showing up in these films for different purposes. So it was pretty serendipitous that I watched Apollo 11 right after this, because I noticed it's like, wow, Apollo 11 would fit right into that kind of cinematic universe of space movies that are set in the 60s. And I also think that Apollo 11 is kind of a direct answer to a lot of the conspiracy theories that the moon landing was faked, something that I've never bought into, but I know a lot of reasonable people think that it was faked. And if you've ever entertained those conspiracies, I think this is a documentary you should absolutely check out. It was directed by Todd Douglas Miller. You did Dinosaur 13 and another one. And even if it's not playing in your area, I think they're going to be playing Apollo 11 in a wider release soon. And then I think it's going to be on TV pretty soon as well. I think on CNN, but I'm not really sure.
The whole Apollo program was designed to get two Americans to the lunar surface and back again to Earth safely. The enormity of this event is something that only history will be able to judge. Apollo 11 has very simply been given the mission of carrying men to the moon, landing them there, and bringing them safely back.
You can feel it in here when it's on.
Okay, it's like the colors going on.
Go, I don't know.
Go. GNC, go. Econ, go. Surgeon, go. Captain onward, go for landing.
Here, go for landing, over. Roger, there, go for landing. 30 feet, 2.5 now.
30 seconds.
I think this is a fascinating documentary. I think that the way it uses the limitations of the footage available to communicate patience and dread and excitement during, bookending a very tumultuous decade. And to me, it almost feels like an exercise in Americans revisiting a period of time where they can feel positive nostalgia for still, since our country seems so far away from the shared pride and joy that previous generations, they've been telling us for so long that this was unlike any other moment in American history. And I think that this documentary definitely makes that case. I had a hard time on that note participating in this film's thesis statement. Even though I loved everything I was seeing and I thought that it was an incredible visual experience, I think something personally was holding me back from getting sucked in. I think I don't know if it's because I prefer the more nuanced character study in First Man, which is more not anti-patriotic, but it's a bit deeper with who this guy is, as opposed to this, which is so straightforward. And I also struggle a little bit with these documentaries, and this is probably blasphemous. I know a lot of people love that more modern documentaries aren't having talking heads or narrators and things like that weaving and explaining the context. Like They Shall Not Grow Old, it's a film where the people of the time period tell the story, nothing more, nothing less. And I'm struggling to decide if that's a filmmaking technique that fully works for me with documentaries. I think for a lot of people it will. And I will reference Mike Wallace's Here, which is another documentary that does that and does that way better. So I think that's what's tripping me up. It's like I was seeing this work really well in a more modern documentary, and that's Mike Wallace's Here. And I don't quite see it in here, but that's where I'm at with Apollo 11. Corey Woodruff, what about you?
Well, again, just to start off, the IMAX is pretty great. I mean, I think that it feels like IMAX, there's still this group of people in Hollywood that still believe in this format. This is one of the things I'm scared we're going to begin to lose as time goes on. It's a premium ticket. It cost me $20 to go the other night or last night when I went. But it's just this is what you have IMAX for. It's to go watch the Apollo 11 launching off into space and seeing that footage that's never really been projected in that way, and looking at just seeing space and just it's the vastness of it, and being able to just kind of soak in just the scope of what's happening. And I think that IMAX is one of the few forms of projection now that still do that in just such a way that you begin to feel small. And I think there were moments in this where I was watching it where you feel the space over you. You feel this big theater and this big image and the way the sound is just surrounding you and engulfing you. And this is still my favorite way to watch a movie. I think IMAX is still the king, but I think that I agree with you on a lot of it. I think that the way it was done, I think Dave Elric had a great point in his review that once you get past the moon, the actual launch, and I think the tension that it builds up, the countdown, all the different perspectives they show, I think that's all really, really effective. The way it's edited, and it's just you feel the tension and it blasts off, and it's just such a huge image. And it really stunned me. I was taken away by that. And then you get into space, and it's he mentioned they only had so much limited footage. And I think that's the problem, is it's just at that point, it's like the film really tries to like, well, we still want to do this in real time, but there's lags in the time, there's lags in the tension. There's a moment like, well, they're there. We know that they're going to be blasting off for a while, so we just have to sit here and twiddle our fingers until we actually get to the point where all these big steps are going. And when you get there, it's pretty great. And then when they get on the moon and you actually see Neil Armstrong actually saying his big lines and going to walk on the moon, and just you see it's that, you sense the discovery and the fear. And I just think it's a movie that kind of has peaks. I love that they showed the heart rates of the guys when they were, you just begin to see the human emotion. I think those are just on a macro level. I think the film is kind of, it ebbs and flows. I preferred the ebbs more than the flows at times. I kind of like the more traditional documentary. I don't want to knock the new way people are trying to do it, where it is just so linear. It is just like almost a narrative in and of itself. But I don't know. I feel like this film could have used just a little bit of gravity, no pun intended, with just having some of these guys actually see them talking. I think it would have been awesome to like have Buzz Aldrin pop up every now and again and just give you the weight of him being like, yeah, we were about to, pass out when we were doing this, and he's just got such a wry sense of humor. I could have used that. I could have used more of just, having a bit more context into why this is huge, why it matters. And, but at the same time, I love the decisions they made to just show the people in the crowds, like, buying Krispy Kreme donuts and going to, I think my favorite part outside of the launch is when they're at NASA and it's just these people just kind of sitting around watching the TV when Chappaquiddick happens with Ted Kennedy. And then being like, well, I guess we've been knocked out of the news cycle. We literally are on our way to the moon, but now it's like this is what people are talking about. And it just makes you just think that life goes on, that we're in this incredible historical moment. History is literally being made. Science is being pushed to its limits, but people are still getting, honey buns at the commissary, and news is still going on, and people are still, sharpening pencils and, sitting watching TV at the lobby at work before they go and run the numbers. Like, I loved that part of it. And I think that's what I wanted more of. I wanted to see more of the nuances of, maybe it would have been cool to get to know some of the people. Like the faces in Mission Control are kind of anonymous. And I get that they can't delve into too much of that because of the tension, but I just would love to have seen more of just more of the ground control, like more of this just dichotomy between people in button-down shirts that are drinking coffee and running numbers on the computer, spliced with these three men that are on a death-defying mission to like push forth human history. I think that's the balance of it that really made it unique outside of just the general footage, outside of the technical achievement, which it is. I mean, that footage is pretty great. And that scene at the end with the parade, it looks beautiful. Like, it's just the way that it's shot and the way they build the tension and the way they allowed the footage to run. Like, I think it's a really great achievement. And I really admire
it. Is blurry in IMAX though. Right.
Yeah.
There's really blurry stuff. And even like some of the text that comes on screen, because it was in IMAX, it was like kind of pixelated. And I was like, that doesn't have to be the case. Like, I get the footage itself not being perfectly, digitally restored. I don't expect it to. But yeah, there were little moments where I was like, this didn't feel quite as polished to me.
Yeah. And I think our IMAX has laser now. And the laser and the screen on the IMAX are still trying to get used to each other. So you kind of get that little like rainbow-esque little flare almost, just because the screen is a little bit older and it's getting used to this new technology. Like, I really admire what it is, but I just don't think it's quite like an amazing documentary, and just in terms of like, some of the great documentaries we saw last year. Like, I think it's more of a cool companion piece to something like First Man, which again, I prefer that way of telling the story as opposed. But again, it's an edifying experience. Like, I don't want to knock it at all. I think it's really, really, it's really effective, and I would love to go see it again at like a museum or something, because it's a quick watch. So yeah, but I think that's the cool thing about it. It's like they should never grow old. It'll play in museums for years. You'll learn a ton. Kids will really enjoy it. It's got enough art to it to where it's like, you can have that richness and the gratification of seeing that footage, but I think that there's just a little bit of a limit there. I think it gives itself by just wanting to be what it is.
What's your final grade on it?
I give it a B plus, something in that range. I think it's really cool, but I think it's kind of more of like, if First Man's an A experience, I think this is like the B side of that.
Yeah, I'm a low B, so we're not too far off there. So, all right, that is Apollo 11. Be sure to keep an eye out for it in your local theater, if it's playing on IMAX and you're interested in the subject matter, definitely worth checking out. Okay, Will Ashton, you saw a film that I think you're the only person who saw Climax, the latest film from Gaspar Noé. I refuse to see this movie.
Yeah,
I have no interest whatsoever. This just feels like Suspiria all over again. I just don't want to do it. And I'm just not in the mood. I just don't want to go to the theater. I don't want to sit through this. I didn't like his other film. But I'm obviously wrong. You're obviously right. Tell us about Climax.
I mean, I don't know if I'm ever right, but I mean, I will say you only saw Love, right? His previous film, which I haven't seen, which I would say by even detractors of Gaspar Noé is like, that's not the best quantifier of his work, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, yeah, as you were saying, yeah, Gaspar Noé's new film is Climax, and the general gist of the plot is that it's centered around these young 20 to 30-year-old dancers who are having basically the time of their lives, just kind of enjoying being young, talking about drugs and sex. It's like, okay, that sounds like your typical Gaspar Noé film. And then they extenuate that by going, hey, that sangria you guys are all drinking, that's spiked with LSD. And everything literally just goes to hell from there. Like, it's just pure madness. And that's where you kind of get the gist of the plot, or maybe lack thereof. With this movie, I can definitely see people being either more or less favorable than they usually are with Gaspar Noé movies. I think it removes some of the pretensions of some of his other films where it's not really saying a whole lot. I'm not even 100% sure what exactly it's saying, if anything. I think for the most part, Gaspar Noé just wanted to make a fun, kind of twisty, darkly comedic little filmmaking experiment with this.
If I may, I did read some reviews on this, which is why, because this is the kind of film where I was like, I am going to read reviews because I don't have interest in it, so I wanted to be convinced. I did read some reviews that mentioned that it might be a statement on French nationalism, because apparently there's a scene where the only Muslim in the group gets kicked out right before everything goes crazy.
I was gonna say, yeah, it definitely. If anything, it feels more like a social commentary. I wasn't sure if it was world politics or more French politics, but like you're saying, that there's a point in the film where it says like it's a French film and proud of it. So I was pretty sure it was more French films. That's why I say it's not so much. I don't think the film is saying something. I just wasn't 100% sure what it's trying to say. And but I think it
premiered at Cannes. You know, of course, it's going to be fully French. Yeah.
So I should note that it takes place in the mid 90s, but it doesn't really point too much out as far as the timeline is concerned. But as a film, like, I think it's a movie that I just greatly enjoyed, but I was wondering as I was watching it, like, is this more just I'm enjoying the filmmaking experience, or am I really getting something out of it? And I think as I think more about it, the more I'm like, I think this might honestly be, and this is a pretty early year, and I haven't really enjoyed that many films. This is maybe my favorite film of the year so far, which is, John, I can hear the visceral in your voice as you're saying it, but it's just so nutty, and it's so, it is fairly self-indulgent as a way. It's a Gaspar Noé film, so you kind of expect that. But it's also just so gung-ho about being what it is and going all out with it that, I mean, you just have to kind of admire just its chutzpah in a way, because in the first half of the movie, you have like a 13-minute single take, which involves an extensive dance sequence, party sequence. That
I saw 5 minutes of it, and because it's on YouTube.
It's the moment of the year. Like, it's, for me right now, like, I haven't seen anything better at the cinema. It's just fantastic. But then, like, as you're watching the first half of the movie, it's just mostly people talking at a party. And it's like, I know, just not only from Gaspar Noé's experience, but just in films in general, like, it's not just going to be like this the whole time. It's too fun and accessible for a Gaspar Noé movie. Something's about to go down. And sure enough, like, halfway through, like, Gaspar Noé's name flashes up as if to say, like, hey, don't forget, I made this movie. And from there, you have a 42-minute single take, like, meltdown, what you're talking about, where, like, people are getting kicked out, people are pointing fingers, like, violence ensues, and it's going to be like a make or break. I think that's the moment where I can definitely see some people being like, I'm not about this, and I can totally understand it, because it may seem needlessly exploitative or maybe cruel for the sake of being cruel. It's definitely a mean-spirited film in that regard, but for me, I mean, I am only growing to like this movie more upon retrospect. It's the only movie I've seen this year that I really want to watch again and really dive into and get the most out of, because I just think it's good filmmaking through and through. And I mean, I don't know if I am going to like it more upon rewatch, or if I'm going to notice more of like what people tend to dislike about his films. But for right now, I'm still kind of high on it. The LSD spiked sangria is still in my system. So for me, it's a B+. I really think it's solid filmmaking. And I think even if you're not really a fan of Gaspar Noé's other films, that you're going to get a lot out of it. It does kind of feel like the spiritual successor in some ways to Enter the Void, which is the only other Gaspar Noé film I've seen. I do think, John, you would like that movie.
Same cinematographer, right?
Yeah, it's the same guy or same person. I forget the person's name.
I know his first name is Benoit, right? But I forget.
Yeah,
his last
he did
name.
something. Oh, he did Spring Breakers as well.
He did, yeah. Which is great. Harmony Korine has the next has another movie coming out soon. So
yeah, he also did Sister Brothers and The Beach Bum, the other Gaspar Noé movie coming up. So it looks beautiful. It's a gorgeous looking movie.
You made the way you said that, it made it sound like Beach Bum is a Gaspar Noé film. Which,
sorry.
No, it is not.
Yeah, which, I mean, in some ways, same difference, right? It's like Pretentious Frauds, maybe. No. I mean, I would definitely say Gaspar Noé is a better filmmaker than Harmony Korine, but I am excited for The Beach Bum because actually, again, that looks like another film where the filmmakers may be putting their pretensions aside and just trying to make a good film. So I'm kind of excited for that. And I am saying right now, as of now, it's early year. Like I said, this is my favorite filmmaking experience of the year. So I give Climax, like I said, B+. I don't know if it really warrants the A- territory because I just don't know if it has too much going for it beyond like what we were talking about. But as it stands, as a piece of filmmaking, I had a great amount of fun watching it.
All right. Well, happy to hear you had a good time at the movies. I mean, it's been, I saw a tweet not too long ago where it was like, at this point last year, we had gotten Black Panther and Game Night and like all these other films. I was like, oh yeah, it hasn't been a terrible first couple of months of 2019, but it also hasn't been particularly memorable. But regardless, we're going to finish out the show here with one last review. This is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, which couldn't be any more different than I think from Climax based on what I know of it. Sure. But yeah, this is the feature directorial debut for Chiwetel Ejiofor, famous actor, of course. He was also stars in the film as Trywell, a farmer in Malawi, Africa. He's struggling to keep his family afloat during a series of bad harvests. The film takes place in 2001. And I got to say, the real star of the film, it's not Ejiofor. It's actually the boy in the title, his son, William. And he's played by newcomer Maxwell Simba. So this film is based on the memoir of the real William of this story. This kid in 2001, he would sneak away from the fields, sneak into a school that he had been expelled from because they couldn't afford the fees. And he would just learn as much as he could about science because he was convinced that science could save his family. It could save like the surrounding community from starvation. So in this clip, Trywell and his son have actually just visited a nearby businessman who's kind of a family friend. They want to use some of their savings to get an advance on a bunch of grain for an upcoming harvest. But, it doesn't turn out quite the way that they're expecting. You'll hear in a second how this guy reacts when they come to him for help. This is a clip.
The Pope. The Pope. That's what we used to call your father back then. The most honest man in all of Lower Market. We used to laugh at him because what good can come from an honest businessman? We used to laugh at him until he carried off the most beautiful woman in the whole place. For farming. Really mad. How is Agnes? Can you help us, Daniel? The rains, Trywell. What can anybody do about these rains?
All right, that is from the new film, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Again, that's now on Netflix. And, in that clip, you can really hear the tired sadness in Ejiofor's voice there after that really long pause. And you can't see it, of course, but his facial expressions, they might as well tell the entire story of what he's feeling when this man deflects from helping his family. And the film is mostly spoken in the native language of that region. It's not all English. Obviously, chose an English clip, but you can hear there at times they do speak English alongside their native one, and it illustrates one of the fascinating aspects of what I ultimately found to be one of my favorite new Netflix films in a little bit. You get an honest, human, and authentic portrayal of modern life in Africa. It's not whitewashed, it's not emotionally manipulative, and it's appealing to something that just feels pretty true, I guess. You could just as easily see a similarly inspiring film set in an American food desert, is what I'm trying to say, where they treat the subjects with respect, where they treat these as human beings, right? And I could totally see that film, an American food desert where a scrappy dreamer tries to defy the odds and save his community from peril and ingenuity. I'm also a big fan in this film of how Ejiofor shows restraint as a director. He lets his own character slide into the background when appropriate, because it's really about Maxwell Simba's character. And he does such a good job with his acting here. He carries the film, and yeah, this film, it's touching, it's brutal, but it's also, when it needs to be, joyful when it comes to its real life characters. It reminded me of, in a good way, Queen of Katwe from Disney. I don't know if you guys saw that, but that's another based on a true story film centered around a young African person who saves the day with their smarts. And like with that film, some people will call it formulaic and maybe trying too hard, but yeah, I finished Boy Who Harnessed the Wind feeling something about a particular moment in our recent history that only a movie like this can do. And I was deeply inspired by it. And I felt like sharing this story with more people is kind of how you want to walk away from a movie. You want more people to see it. So I hope that's the case with this one. It's in limited release right now, very, very limited release, but you can also check it out on Netflix. And I hope you guys do. It's pretty good. I think I'm about a B plus on it, probably a pretty high B on this film. So
yeah, I wanted to watch this one. I unfortunately didn't get a chance to see it this weekend, but I heard good things out of Sundance, and hopefully I'll get a chance to see it soon.
I'm convinced. I'll give it a spin.
All right. Sounds great. And with that, that's all the time we have this week for Cinemaholics. Next week, we're going to be talking about Gloria Bell and the Kid. I think that's all that's coming out, right, guys?
Isn't Triple Front? Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, there you go.
That's one big one.
Yeah, so Captain Marvel is going to be coming out next week. Keep your eyes out.
Yeah. We're teasing for it. We obviously know that it's coming out.
We'll be having a written review coming out next week on cinemaholics.com. And then we'll, of course, be talking about on the show with hopefully with a couple of special guests. So definitely looking forward to that. And yes, we will, of course, mention Gloria Bell at some point when we can. But all right, that's it for us this week. If you love Cinemaholics and you want us to continue, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you can review a podcast. Our Facebook and Twitter pages are in the show notes of this episode, along with our email, cinemahawkspodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, great times, guys. I feel like I came to this episode itching for, reconciliation. Will, you came itching for a fight. I feel like we landed somewhere in between.
I think so.
All right. Well, from the Internet California, I am John Agroni.
And from the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
And from Nashville, it's Corey Woodruff.
Not the Internet, for sure. See you next time.
No, we don't have Internet out this way. It's mainly just a guy on a wheel that spins outside.